Hey guys, this is going to be a little follow-up to the other two videos. If you haven't seen them, we covered how to perspective match a building within 3ds, as well as how to set up render elements ready to be imported into Photoshop. One small mistake I made with that previously was you ideally do not want to render an image in your background. You want to set your background to the color white, and you want to turn your render map off for the background. The reason for this is because the background layer that we render out, we want to use as a mask. We can use an alpha, which is already provided within the renders, and I will show you how to do that. But ideally, you shouldn't have a background on the scene, and instead you should probably have your background on your lighting, so that that comes out in the beauty render, but doesn't come out for the background layer. So what we're going to do first is, as you can already see, we have our image, our little background image that we were preparing and planning our perspective shot for. And I've gone and re-rendered our elements because previously I had actually failed to set it to the right resolution. Silly me. But when you bring your when you bring a background in, there should be a little lock symbol on the background. You're going to want to uncheck it because you're going to want to be able to move this layer up and down within the image. And we're just going to quickly rename it. So we're just going to double click on it. Call it background. And a little trick for sourcing things in Photoshop. If you right click on a layer, you can add a color. For our background, we're going to set it to blue. And it'll show by the hide unhide image color of the layer, which is useful for when you have like 50 different layers and adjustments and you need to quickly find what's what. So with these render elements that we brought out, the first thing we want to do is we want to add our specular, refraction, reflection, lighting, and a global illumination layers. These are the 5 minimum layers that are required to make the beauty render. So we're just going to drag them in from a folder up on the side. And you're just going to press enter with every image you drag in. Just make sure to drag it on top of the image, because if you drag it anywhere other than on top, it will start adding extra ones along the top. And as you may see, we have a separate image open up here, ready for later. Now, the order of this doesn't matter too much. You can reorder them if you need to, and you may have some individual needs with your with your images. However, what we want to do first is we want to select all 5 of these layers. So what I did is I clicked on the top one, I held down Shift, and while holding Shift, I clicked on the bottom, and it selects all the layers in between. We're going to change the blend mode. So there are many different types of blend modes within Photoshop. Here on this normal button will bring up the list. As you hover over them, you can see previews of what they do. I'm not going to go into details for these because I don't fully understand them myself, but there's a lot of different math stuff going on here. The one we want for the sake of this is linear dodge add. Now don't worry, it does look like a ghost image on top right now. That is fine because if we turn off the background, you can see we have our beauty render pretty much. So with these 5, I'm just going to group them into a folder, make working with them nice and organized. I'm going to rename that folder beauty render. I'm just going to give it a color so that it's easy to spot. I'm going to have that as red. Now I'm going to move the beauty render passes underneath the background, and you'll see why later. Right now, obviously you can't see the beauty render, and if we hide the background, you can. What we need to do, therefore, is we need to add something called a mask to the background. What a mask will do is it will use black and white as an image, and it'll use that to determine which parts should be transparent and which parts shouldn't be. So black will be transparent, white will be fully opaque. So with that in mind, we're going to bring in our background image, background render pass. Notice how it's already white and black like we need. So what we're going to do is we're going to move that background just underneath our actual background image. So what we want to do is we want to add a layer mask. To do that, we just hover over this little icon down here. It's a little square with a circle out. It should be nice and zoomed in on screen for you right now. When you click that, it will add a layer mask to the image that you have selected, or the layer you have selected. Right now you can see there's a little white box next to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on our V-Ray background layer. We're just going to Control A and Control C, and we're going to turn that layer off, in fact. Now we're going to hold down the Alt key and we're going to click on the layer mask. Now what you could do here, as you can see, we have our mask up. It's all white. Now black is the color that is required to cut through. So you could take a paintbrush, in theory, and you could just, say, draw some squiggles. And if we click back on the layer, you can see that we're cutting through to the other layers below. So as we don't want that, we're just going to right click and delete our layer mask. And we're going to add a new one. We're going to Alt click back on it. And we're just going to paste in our background, hit enter, and click on our regular image. And now you can see our beauty render is now nice and set aside. We can actually get rid of this background layer now if we want to. So just to keep things more organized, I'm going to do that now. The next stage we want for our preparation is we included some render elements such as multi-matte element and material ID. Now the reason we included those was to create masks specifically for selecting certain parts of the building when we want to make adjustments. So we're going to bring those both in now. So like before, we're just going to click and drag them in. We're going to hit enter for each image. And we're going to select the pair of them and we're going to put them in a folder. We're just going to call it masks. We're going to give that a color. So I'm just going to make it purple. And we're going to move our background image below them because we want these to be sat on top. Now, you don't have to mask this or do anything about it. All you're going to do is you're going to turn all these layers off. The reason we want them at the top is if I wanted to say, select these windows to make specific adjustments to the windows for a certain area, I'd be able to go to my masks and turn on the mask I wanted. In this case, the UA material ID would be probably suitable. So I could select in here, for instance, using the Magic Wand tool, this and this window. So just holding Shift allows you to select multiple. And you can generate a mask using that. And I could, for instance, put that onto another layer. So just dragging and dropping and disable that. And you'll notice there's a very slight difference, but on the specular layer, we masked it so that only those windows would, only those windows wouldn't be visible. Now, I said I was going to show you a way of how to turn your alpha layer into a mask, or not, into a mask for it, like you would with your background. So what you would do is you'd bring in your alpha layer like before, press enter. And this is where we are going to introduce another menu. We have a modifier menu down here. Now, when you click on it, it's this little half shaded circle. When we click on this, there's one called invert. Now, when you apply one of these modifiers, as you can see in the stack, it comes in as a normal layer. However, this invert is currently applying to all layers. So if I turn off my alpha, you'll notice how all the other layers are suddenly inverted. We don't want that. And there's an easy, simple fix to that, one which you're going to use a lot throughout this. You're going to hold down Alt, and you're going to hover over the line between the two layers. And you'll get this little icon, the square with the arrow pointing down. I'm going to click. And that binds it to this layer. Now, all we've done now is invert it to a white and black layer. Next, what we want to do is we want to select both the layer and the modification. We want to right click, and we want to select merge layers. This is made the same as our background image, and then we would use the same steps of copying and pasting it into a mask to mask the background layer like before. Nice and simple. So, deleting this invert real quick. As you can see in our beauty layer, we now have all these different functions which we can turn on and off at will. We could bring in our beauty pass and take a look at it and compare it. But for now, we're going to just work by eye. As you can see with our specular layer is quite bright. And it looks a little bit too bright for the scene. So I'm going to show you how to modify one specific element of it. So we're going to select on our specular layer like before. And we are going to go and add a modifier called brightness and contrast. Now we need to remember to hold Alt and click between the two layers to combine the two layers together so that it only applies to the specular. Now here we have a brightness bar and a contrast bar. What we're going to do is we're just going to turn this brightness down so these bricks look a little closer to the bricks up front. gonna just play around with the contrast and make it a little darker. Now, these layers can even be applied to masks. So in theory, you could take from one of the other passes and separate it based on, say, your material ID or by your multi-matte element by using one of those as a mask for this layer. Alternatively, as mentioned before, we could just use a paintbrush on it. So for instance, if I had a black brush and we're just going to the size a lot to make it so we're not applying it to this side, for instance. Just as a really quick, rough example, or what would make more sense in this particular case. Accidentally create another layer, so we're just going to delete that real quick. Activate. We're going to keep on our speculator, but have our mask selected. Make sure that's still selected. Just going to draw very quickly over the front, so that our side is now darker than our front. Very, very basic. Now you can do this with a whole lot of different layers. For instance, we keep playing, we disable our brightness and contrast, and we add another layer or modifier to this. For instance, let's use hue and saturation. Now, this has 3 bars. It has its hue shift, it has a saturation, and it has a lightness. We can actually darken this using the lightness darkness bar from the hue saturation, which is another way to do it. We can bring the saturation all the way down or bring the saturation all the way up. Or if you want a bit more fun, you can apply a hue shift. Hue shift doesn't always work the way you think it does, but on a really good example, it will just randomly slide you through the color wheel. Not 100% sure why it's doing this. It might be because we are currently blending the previous layer below. Dodge add. But beside the point, you can apply multiple of these modifiers onto a stack, and each one can have their own masks. In some cases, you can even have multiple masks. So we're just going to get rid of our hue and saturation layer here because we don't need it. And what we're going to do next is show you how to bring in an extra element, say a human, how to color match it, how to check the lightness of it, and how to correct the lightness. A little bit of basic compositing. So we are using a sheet from TonyTextures.com. It's just a free ArcViz graphic. And as you can see in here, there's lots of different people. Now, I had a little practice run with this guy earlier. I had a little bit of trouble with him just because of his green jacket. So we're going to select someone else. Normally, you would select someone who would have fit your scene. Now, I'm just going to pick someone at random. So this dude, we're going to select him using our lasso tool or a square selection tool. And we're just going to press Ctrl-C to copy him. We're going to go back to our render here, or our composite here, sorry. And we're just going to paste him in. Now, I'm going to create a new folder called people. And I'm going to recolor it to say fuchsia and put the little man in the folder. So what we're going to do is we're going to press Ctrl-T, or if you want to go through here, you can press Edit and click on Free Transform. This will bring up your bounding boxes. You have proportional scaling on the corners and improportionate scaling if you hold Shift on the sides and top. So we're going to set him back to how he was. We're going to move him around just by clicking and dragging. We're going to have him walk on this path. Now, you may be thinking, he looks way too small. You're correct. We're going to just up his size a little bit. And we have some reference points here. These little fence posts, they're typically not too high. They're usually below your shin level, or knee level, sorry. So this looks probably at a glance could be the correct size. So we're going to go with that for now, and we're just going to put him at the front of the scene. We're just going to click Done. Now, as you can see, he does not quite look like he fits the scene, and there's going to be several reasons for that. Firstly, the light levels may not match within the image, and secondly, the colors may not match. So we're going to start with matching his colors. Now, the method I'm going to show you is what's known as a destructive method. What that means is, once you do it, long term, you won't be able to undo it. So unlike those effect elements that I showed you earlier, such as the brightness and contrast here on the specular layer, you can't just undo that, or you won't be able to undo this method, which you can with these effects. So when you do this, you're making a decision that later on down the line, you're not going to be able to undo. You may be able to undo it using Control-Z immediately if you don't like it, but you need to make that decision there and then. You're going to have to commit to it. So we are going to go back down for the image adjustments, match color. We'll set our source as the Adobe stock, which in your case will be whatever your image is called that you opened up originally. And we're going to select our background image layer. This is why it's important to name your layers. So we're going to use neutralize. Most of the time I end up using neutralize because it helps bring some of the colors being back naturally. And we're going to fade the effect a little bit so he doesn't look like he's like a glowing man. So he was way too bright there. We're just going to bring up our color intensity a little bit because the scene is quite, you notice on the grass, it's quite saturated. When you're doing this color match, you need to be looking at your scene. You can't just push the sliders and go, oh, that looks good. If he's in a dark area, you don't want him to be so bright and you might want to bring his luminance down. And it is not the brightest scene. We have this grass here, which is kind of a brownish color. It's fairly similar to his trousers. So we can make some adjustments for the luminance just to bring those trousers to looking similar, but not too bright. Might even bring the color intensity down a little bit, just because his shirt looked a bit too saturated still. I'm relatively happy with that for like a very quick adjustment, so we're just going to hit OK. Now, as you can see, there is no modifiers, so the only way to get that back to how it was is to Control-Z or to delete the layer and re-import it altogether. From here, I'm going to show you how to match the lights, as we've now matched the colors to the scene relatively okay. Bear in mind, you could do this to all your beauty render layers if you wish to as well, but may take you a lot of time to do it that way, and it may not be the most effective way for you to do it. So, to check how his light fits into the scene, we once again want to go into our adjustment layers. We are looking for one right near the bottom called Threshold. But don't worry, it is meant to look awful like this. I'm just going to put this right up to the top. What this is a histogram which shows you the light and darks. So in most of your scenes, if you're at a daylight setting, your sky will most likely be the brightest part of your scene for the entire thing. And your shadows are going to be your darkest. Now this shows you a map of all the lights and darks. So when you drag this little icon below, as we scroll here, your darks should turn to white. So any remaining black is your darkest darks. Now the man is not darker than any of the other shadows within the scene, so if we just disable that real quick, his darkest parts, which are on his back, which are as dark as these shadows, he probably needs to be a little bit brighter on his darkest areas. We can bring that up potentially, especially as by the looks of it, the lighting is coming from the back. Now there's a few ways we'll do that, and I'll show you how to do that near the end. And if we bring our histogram back on, we want to check, this is one of the most important ones too, the whitest whites. So the sky has mostly faded here. You can see some white on him still. Now, do you think that white bottle that he's holding in his hand and his wrist bracelet should be brighter than our sky? Definitely not. So we already know, just going this far, that he's probably too bright. Because only the clouds are brighter in the scene, as well as a few highlights of where the sunlight is directly on a very reflective surface. So, the best way to adjust our lights is to go back to our original person, layer with the person on, and we go back to our adjustments, and we're going to apply one called Levels. And if you scroll down, you might recognize that there's this histogram here. What we're going to do is we're going to just pull this white bar. You'll notice but I currently don't actually have it locked to a layer. Silly me. So remember, hold Alt, connect it to the layer. You'll notice as I drive this along, man gets darker and darker. We're just going to move it around a little bit. We're going to go to our threshold, and we're just going to pay attention to this white area. This is what we want to push down. Push down. There we go. That's probably where it should be invisible within the histogram. So let's see what that looks like. That's looking better. That's not like a bright shining white anymore. Now if we go back to our threshold and we go back to our darkest darks, where do we think he should be? So we want it. Darkest dark should probably be around there. We're going back to this layer levels adjustment again. Scroll it back down. We're just going to bring those darks up. So he needs to be kind of brighter within the scene too, or at least not as dark. Sorry. I'm going to turn our thresholds off. Now that's looking a little jank, and that doesn't look correct. So maybe I've overdone it here. Okay, it's non-destructive, so I can bring that down. And we're probably just going to keep it at 0. And we'll do another adjustment to this later instead. So that is our levels. Now, we've said that he should probably be brighter on this side. So I'm just going to hold Alt and scroll in and zoom in on the guy a little bit. While holding space, you can drag and drop with the you can pan around by left clicking. So he is now color matched. We do have one small issue with his foot. Was that present here? Yes, it was. Well, that's going to look a little bit weird. That's fine. What we're going to do now is we're going back to the original layer and we're going to apply. Well, actually, we can keep selected onto this levels layer. And we are going to bring a brightness contrast layer or an exposure layer. Let's have a look at the exposure real quick. To apply it down, blend him. As you can see, we can glow him up or darken him down. I'm going to up the brightness because I want to take a look at how bright those are. I'm just going to bump up the brightness a little bit. And right now we're brightening the whole guy up, but that is fine. You've got gamma correction and you've got offset as well. Now, in our case, we don't need any gamma correction or offset, I don't believe. And what we're going to do is we're going to just say we're going to use our mask. So you could either bring in a black fill layer and just paste that in. But you could just alt click on the exposure layer. What we're going to do, we're going to find our paint bucket tool, which is always a pain to find, I believe. Snap? Nope, it's under the gradient. We're going to bring in our paint bucket tool, set it to black. And we're just going to fill in. And then we're going to click back to our layer. So right now our exposure isn't done. We're going to select back on our mask. And we're going to set our paintbrush to white. We're going up to the top. So we're going to play with our hardness settings. Hardness 0 is going to have the most feathering. Hardness 100 is going to be sharp edges. We're going to want relatively soft edges for this, and we're going to bring our brush size down. It's just a little drop down. We're just going to start dragging and painting some white onto his edge highlights. The reason we're doing this is that we just want to bring a little bit of light back into the scene. And to go back and forth, we can set it back to black up in the top right there. We can just paint areas darker if we've overdone it a little bit. So this is just going to make him look a little bit more natural in the scene. This is one way you can do it. There are many different ways you could go about bringing lightness into the scene. This is a nice simple one with just the paintbrush. It requires a little bit of attention to detail and some artistic interpretation of how things should be lit up. If you understand lighting, you can do a much better job than I can. But it looks a little bit better now. Now, there's one other thing that this man is missing. He's missing a shadow. Right now, he looks like he's just kind of floating on the plane. So, what we're going to do to give him a shadow, we're going to duplicate him. We're going to right-click. We're going to duplicate layer. We're just going to hit OK. We're going to bring him down. Now, that has unfortunately unpaired two of our previous adjustments. We're just going to pair them up with the alt click. We're going to go to Edit. We're going to go to Transform. We're going to put vertical. Now, because he's in motion, I also like to add a horizontal transform too. The reason why is because your shadow will be flipped the other way. So your right foot, your left foot will look different from that outer perspective. So what we'll do next is, there's two ways you can do this. You can either use transform and skew, and that just allows you to push the corners to make it angled, and then move it around with free transform using Control T and place it under his feet. For me, I prefer perspective warp. So what this does is it drag around the image that you're using. You hit enter. It gives you these 4 corner pins. You can drag these freely, and as you can see, it's starting to fly around and warp. Now, I don't know why his head is cutting off. Maybe it's just because I pulled the angle too far. There's something there which is not quite allowing me to move across. Maybe there's a mask or something applying. But that doesn't matter, because right now we are dealing with very soft shadows. As you can see, shadows behind the fences don't fall very far. So we're going to very tiny dude. We just want to kind of have his feet matched up. So like you can see why I flipped him horizontally real quick. If I out, you can see this, his left foot there matches with that left foot there, and vice versa. Flipping it horizontally corrects for what gets flipped in the verticals. We're just gonna let them. Okay, they're matched up. Very short shadow. Now, right now, it looks silly. So we press enter to just clear that off. And yeah, it looks silly. We've got a little dude under him. We don't want that to look like that. We want that to look like a shadow. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a hue and saturation layer to our clone shadow. And we're going to scroll down, and we're going to take the saturation all the way to -100 to grayscale them. We're going to bring our our lightness down. We're going to have it quite dark. It doesn't have to be 100%. When you look at shadows, shadows aren't just a solid black. They will fade a little bit inside them. That can depend on what clothing they're wearing. So you'll have to make some judgments based off of what clothes they're wearing, as to how you want to adjust your shadow. However, for now, we're just going to bring it nice and dark. When you're going to select on your shadow layer, you're just going to bring your opacity down. Now, unfortunately, Photoshop doesn't bring it out in real time. While it's a very soft shadow, it is still relatively dark. So we want to get somewhat dark. But these shadows are also a bit blurry, and shadows don't tend to have sharp edges like this. So what you'll want to do is you want to go to its filter, go to blur, and add a box blur. Now we're going to want to bring that down quite a lot. I need like 2 to 3 pixels, maybe. Judge it by eye, and we're just going to hit OK. And now the guy looks a little bit more placed in the scene. Obviously, there's a lot of things you can do to make this look better. And a lot of little tricks you can use to make this look more believable. But these are the bare basics. The main things you want to remember is you want to be using your adjustment layers. You want to be using masks. And you want to make sure that you're locking down these layers by holding Alt and clicking in between the layers. You can use this to unpair the layers too, so you can see how it reapplies to the entire scene below. But make sure these are locked. Locking them is going to be the most important thing for most of your adjustments. There's way more adjustments you can do. For instance, for like we'll click on a layer, our shadow, you can double click on it, and it brings up all these other emotions that you can use. You can use a gradient overlay, add colors to it, add drop shadows, add outer glows, inner glows. Mess around and find out, like, your scene is going to require different requirements from what mine does. So I can't show you everything that you're going to need. So you're going to have to play around with some of these. And some of these can even be found under the FX model. In fact, all of them can be found under the FX tab, and they can then be toggleable on and off here too. That is pretty much everything we need to cover. Just remember the paint on your masks, and when you need to bring in colors to check, make sure you use your match color tool, and make sure you use thresholds to check your lightness. Other than that, have fun playing around. Hopefully, you can make a very nice looking scene. Goodbye.